Shaq, the little girl whispered, do you think I'll ever get to play basketball again? He looked at her, fighting back tears, and said, Lila, you already play. Every time you hold that ball, every time you smile, you're in the game. And you got more heart than anyone I know. The giant and the little dreamer. Shaquille O'Neal was used to being noticed. At over 7 feet tall, with shoulders as broad as a doorway and hands that could palm a basketball as if it were a tennis ball, he had lived much of his life in the spotlight. From the roaring NBA arenas to the flashing cameras of Hollywood and business ventures, he carried with him an aura that filled every room he entered. But fame, he often reminded himself, was only a shadow of who you truly are. The measure of a man, his mother used to say, is how he makes others feel when they stand in his presence. Shaq never forgot that. It was a bright afternoon in Orlando when the story began. Shaq had finished a charity event at a children's hospital, one of the many he quietly attended without the press. He loved those visits. He would crack jokes, hand out toys, and pose for photos with children who needed a reason to smile. But on this particular day, something, or rather, someone, stopped him from walking straight out the door. In a small playroom off to the side, a little girl sat alone by the window. She had big brown eyes, framed with lashes too heavy for her thin, pale face. A knitted cap covered her head where her hair should have been, and in her lap she clutched a worn basketball, almost comically large against her tiny body. Shaq paused. Hey, Lil one, he said gently, lowering his booming voice so it came out like a soft rumble instead of thunder. Why you sittin' here all by yourself? Ain't no fun in that. The girl looked up, startled at first, then blinked twice as if unsure whether the giant before her was real. You're Shaquille O'Neal, she whispered. Shaq smiled, crouching so his enormous frame wouldn't tower over her. Some folks call me that, yeah. But you? You can just call me Shaq. What's your name? Lila, she said softly. That's a beautiful name, Lila. He nodded toward the ball in her lap. You hoop? Her lips curled into the hint of a smile. I used to. Before, her voice trailed off, and she tightened her grip on the basketball. Shaq didn't press. He had visited enough hospitals to know when silence spoke louder than words. Instead, he gently tapped the ball with one finger, making it roll a few inches. Mind if I show you a trick? Lila's eyes lit up with curiosity. Shaq took the ball, spun it on his massive fingertip with practiced ease, and then leaned forward so the spinning ball rested delicately on Lila's small finger. Her eyes widened in awe. For the first time that day, laughter bubbled out of her like sunlight breaking through clouds. You did it. Shaq chuckled. See? You got skills already. That was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Shaq found himself returning to the hospital more often than he'd planned. At first it was once a week, then twice, then nearly every time his schedule allowed. Something about Lila's spirit drew him in. She was only 8 years old, battling leukemia with more courage than most adults could muster. Yet, in her presence, Shaq felt a quiet strength that humbled him. She asked questions about his games, his teammates, his favorite foods, even his shoe size, laughing when he let her try on one of his sneakers that looked bigger than her entire torso. But one afternoon, as he helped her take a few slow steps in the therapy room, she said something that struck him. Shaq, she whispered, do you think I'll ever get to play basketball again? Like, really play? Shaq looked down at her fragile frame, the 4-tube taped to her arm, the weariness etched into her young face. For a moment, his heart clenched. But he forced himself to smile. Lila, he said, resting one enormous hand gently on her shoulder, you already play. Every time you hold that ball, every time you laugh, you're in the game. Basketball ain't just about running up and down a court, it's about heart. And you? You got more heart than anyone I know. Her eyes glistened. But what if I don't get better? Shaq knelt down so his eyes met hers directly. Then you fight. Every day, you fight. And I'll make you a promise, no matter what happens, I'll always be in your corner. Deal? She extended her tiny pinky. He wrapped it gently with his enormous finger. "Deal," he said. Shaq's visits became legendary on the hospital floor. Nurses would peek into Lila's room just to catch a glimpse of the NBA superstar reading bedtime stories in funny voices, or teaching her how to spin a ball on a pencil. But what amazed everyone most was how much Shaq seemed to learn from her. One day, after she had endured a painful treatment, Lila looked at him and said, "You know what I do when it hurts? I pretend I'm in the fourth quarter, and the game's almost over. If I can just make it to the buzzer, then I win." Shaq felt his throat tighten. He thought of all the championship games he had played, the times he had battled exhaustion, injury, and pressure. And yet, compared to this little girl's struggle, his challenges seemed so small. "You're tougher than me, Lila," he admitted. "Way tougher." She grinned. "Maybe. But you're taller." Christmas came and Shaq showed up at the hospital with a special surprise. He wheeled in a brand new adjustable basketball hoop, decorated with ribbons. "For you," he said, unveiling it with a flourish. Lila gasped, her hands covering her mouth. "Really? Really? Every baller needs a hoop. Doctors say you can't go running around yet, so we'll bring the game to you." He set it up in the playroom, lowering the rim so she could make shots from her wheelchair. The first time she sank the ball, Shaq roared with exaggerated excitement, pretending to fall over as if she had just scored on him in an NBA Finals game. The room filled with laughter, but later that night, as Shaq sat alone in his car before driving home, tears filled his eyes. For all the championships, the fame, the money, nothing had ever made him feel prouder than seeing that little girl. Lila's condition grew worse in the spring. Treatments took their toll, and her energy faded. Shaq visited whenever he could, sometimes flying across states between commitments just to spend an hour by her side. One evening, she was unusually quiet. "Shaq," she whispered weakly, "are you scared of anything?" He thought carefully before answering. "I'm scared of letting people down. Of not being there when someone needs me." Lila squeezed his hand. "You never let me down." Shaq swallowed hard. "And you never let me down either, Lil One. You're the bravest teammate I've ever had." Lila passed away peacefully a few weeks later, with her family and Shaq by her side. She was only 8 years old, but the impact she left on him, and everyone who met her, was immeasurable. At her memorial service, Shaq stood before the small gathering, tears streaming down his face. He held up the little basketball she had once carried everywhere, now signed with his name and hers together. "She taught me," he said in a trembling voice, "that greatness isn't about how many points you score or how many trophies you win. It's about how you touch lives. This little girl, Lila, she touched mine forever." From that day on, Shaq made it his mission to honor her memory. He established a scholarship fund in her name, supporting young girls who dreamed of playing basketball. At every charity event, he would tell her story, reminding others that kindness, courage, and love were the true measures of success. And in quiet moments, when he stood alone on an empty court, he sometimes swore he could hear her laughter echoing, soft, pure, and eternal. Years later, when asked about his proudest achievement, Shaquille O'Neal didn't mention championships or MVP awards. Instead, he smiled softly and said, "There was this little girl once, her name was Lila. She taught me how to be strong, how to fight, how to believe. I was supposed to inspire her, but truth is, she inspired me. That's my greatest victory." Thank you for watching. Like, share, comment, and subscribe our channel. Press bell icon to stay connected with us.